Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for presiding over this nomination hearing. One of the most important things we do as members of the committee is oversee nominations, and we need the help of all of our colleagues in getting through the nominees. So I appreciate both you and the ranking member for doing it, and thank you for the courtesy of being able to go first. I have some other issues. Congratulations to the nominees. Before us today, we thank you and all of your families for your service to our country. Let me take a few minutes of personal privilege to speak about Michael Schiffer, who has been my longtime senior advisor and counselor on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's one of the leading foreign policy minds in Washington, having also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia. He's a respected expert on Asia with a network of relationships across the continent. I never forgot when I first started visiting Asia when I was on the committee in 2006 and started going with Michael to visit Asia. And it would be very interesting to me when heads of state, including when I was chairman of the committee previously, would say, "Hello, Mr. Schiffer," before they'd say hello to me. So it just goes to the depth of relationships he has. I've long relied on Michael's counsel, expertise, and judgment in dealing with some of the most vexing issues facing the committee, and no one is more qualified or more deserving of this nomination than he is. He's dedicated and committed to a values-based foreign policy that champions freedom, human rights, and democracy, and he'll be a strong advocate for those principles across the continent, and will work to ensure that AID's programming reflect our values and our interests. And he is someone who doesn't hesitate to speak his mind. Stories about his willingness to speak truth to power abound, but don't worry, Michael, I won't share them here today. But it's an important quality that will serve him well in the executive branch as he ensures that USAID has a seat at the table and a voice in the interagency process. It's precisely that kind of leadership that we need in the administration today, someone that knows the right approach on assistance to Asia and how to get it there. So I appreciate all of those great assets, and I will not continue with my remarks on you because then my time will be eaten up for questions. So I'll include them for the record. Michael, thank you for your excellent work with us. Mr. Fick, to be the ambassador at large for cyberspace and digital diplomacy is the new frontier for us. The State Department unveiled the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Diplomacy in April this year. Last week, the committee introduced a State Department authorization of 2022, which contains a version of the Cyber Diplomacy Act that would authorize the CDP Bureau in statute and thus support its long-term viability. What would be your top priorities as ambassador at large for the Bureau if it finds its footing in the department?
Thank you, Senator, for the question and also for having me here today. I have three immediate top priorities, and I think of them as concentric rings moving from innermost to outermost. Because the Bureau is new, the first and innermost priority is building the team and establishing a culture both in the Bureau and in the department where a fluency and expertise in digital technologies is seen as important to the careers and futures of career Foreign Service officers and members of the civil service. I can imagine a future where any candidate to be a chief of mission is expected to have an understanding of these issues because they're a substrate that cut across every aspect of our foreign policy. The second priority, the second ring moving outward, is to assert the State Department's rightful place in the interagency process on topics of cybersecurity and digital policy. And then third are all of the policy challenges out there in the world. The wolf closest to the door, so to speak, in my view, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the threats and opportunities it provides in the digital space for us. And then I believe our strategic competition with China along digital lines is probably the defining strategic question of my generation.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say about making sure that the equities of the State Department at the table in the interagency process are honed, because from my perspective, sometimes the State Department doesn't get its due as it relates to its critical role in the context of the interagency process, so that'll be an important one. And I hope that you will, upon confirmation, create a productive relationship with this committee. This committee has members that are very interested in this domain and want to engage with you in the days ahead.
I commit to that, sir.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, one other question. Ms. Korhonen, did I pronounce it correctly? Okay. The Trans-Sahel Counter-Terrorism Partnership Program Act of 2021, which is law, which I sponsored, not only calls for a strategy for the Sahel, it calls for a specific strategy for Mali as part of the overall approach. We had a hearing where representatives from state, DOD, and USAID shared the administration's approach. And as I mentioned at that time, we look to have input into the strategy as a result of that hearing. Could you briefly outline for me the draft 5-year strategy for Mali? How does that strategy differ from the approach of previous administrations with respect to balancing the so-called 3 Ds in Mali?